Well, hello there, and welcome to Strong, Courageous Men. I am your host, Caleb Effingert, and I have the joy of interviewing wise, godly men on a variety of topics. These conversations are intended to encourage us to be strong, courageous men, humbly living for the glory of Christ as we run this race toward heaven. Hey there, and happy 2025. As men, we can so often chase success in our work, with our families, and in our churches. But is our idea of success the same as God's idea of success? What does success for a strong, courageous man look like? Well, I hope this conversation is helpful for you as I talk to my good friend Neil about thinking through success that honors the Lord. Well, welcome back. Today we have Neil Almeida. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you are a very busy man. And why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, super grateful to be here for sure. It's an interesting thing to be on a podcast. First time I've done it, but happy to join you and talk a little bit about who I am. But I think briefly, I'm a guy who loves the Lord and loves to work. I've got quite a journey in terms of my electrical career. I've been an electrician for I guess it's been around 30 plus years now. Grew up doing it as a kid and eventually started a few different businesses doing it. One with my dad and a couple on my own. And so, yeah, I have enjoyed that career. It's been good to me and my family. The Lord's really provided well for us in all of that and helped build perspective along the way. I really love the local church, was very involved at our church in San Diego. Now we're all the way over here in Florida, and so just trying to do life over here and kind of build another business and get plugged in at our local church here. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here. Really, really thankful for the opportunity just to do this podcast. So, thanks, brother, for the invite.
Oh, yeah. And I hope you're okay with me saying this, letting people know that we actually get to work together.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you're not ashamed of that.
Yeah, I'm not. Working through it.
No, it's been a blessing to get to know you and your family over the past year, and yeah, we love you guys so excited to have this conversation with you, and which you and I have talked about success over really the past year, what that looks like and stuff. So just by way of kind of setting the framework for a conversation here, the topic is success. What does success look like? We certainly live in a world where, and I might even add West Palm Beach, where we live here, it's success, AKA money, is a big deal. It's a pretty big deal. There's some fun stats on like just the wealth that we have here in West Palm Beach. You can just Google it and stuff. But anyways, so in our culture, I think, you, and even in the church too, it's kind of snuck in, maybe some worldly versions of success, but success, when that word pops up, and really in our conversations and such, honestly, I could probably speak for a lot of people when I think I tie it to money. I tie it to maybe status, maybe titles, job titles and such, and maybe church titles and all this. So that being said, I kind of want to talk about three things today. What does success look like in your career? And maybe let me rephrase that. What does biblical success look like in your career, in your family, and in your church? So we can start with career. What does biblical success look like in your career? Side note, the world would probably say, the biggest title you can get and the biggest paycheck you can get. So that being said, is that true, Neil?
Great question. That's a great question. I have to kind of start off by saying, when you probably a few months ago kind of ran this idea of let's talk about success. One, I'm thinking, wow, me on a podcast seems funny. And then me on a podcast talking about success. I'm I find that a bit intriguing because I don't know. It's interesting when you think of success, and this is really something in one sense I don't think much about, if I'm honest, but I do think of it in terms of what does God say success is? There was a season of my life that I would say I was pretty caught up with what success looked like from the outside looking in. So man's approval, essentially. I think ultimately I would have measured success based on stuff, right? How successful you are in your business, what that can bring in terms of stuff. I think on the onset, I would be careful to say stuff isn't the problem, right? Money is not the issue. I do think it's hard issues. I do think when you think of success, certainly biblically, you can't worship two masters, Jesus says, right? You're going to love one and hate the other. And I do think that early in my life, even as a believer, caught up with trying to understand how that worked out and what success looked like. So certainly from a worldly perspective, success is pretty much a monetary idea, right? I think it's very much how you climb a corporate ladder or how big of a house you live in or what kind of cars you drive. And even now, probably even more so than 30, 40 years ago, one sense you're being judged or measured based on what you look like from the outside. And when I say look like, I don't merely mean appearance. I mean kind of the jewelry you wear, the watches you have on, the houses you live in, the community you're a part of. And so I think success worldly, culturally, it gets defined in a lot of ways, but I think primarily definitely by how big your bank account is. And again, I would reiterate that I don't think that's a huge problem. I think a big bank account's not the issue. I think what you drive is not the issue. I would really boil it down to the heart and what it looks like. Again, speaking from a Christian perspective, right? Biblically, a biblical understanding of why the Lord blesses us and why he gives us what he gives us as stewards of that is primarily at the heart of the issue, right? So if the Lord blesses us by any means or with any means, how are we using that unto the glory of the Lord? So I think from the question initially was work. What does success look like in business?
Yep.
Again, I think from a biblical perspective, it is how we're going to honor the Lord with what he gives us. So, if the Lord has blessed you with means, whether you built your own company or you climbed the corporate ladder, what is the point of that? I think you and I have had a lot of conversation in the little while that we've known each other about perspective, why the Lord blesses, why he gives. And if we're not careful, and even in the church, we get caught up with the idea of so we can have more, so our family can have a bigger house, so that, we can have a bigger car. And those are fine and well, but is that why the Lord blesses us? Or is it ministry? Is it to give to those that are struggling? Is it to prioritize, ministry at the church? Is it to support our pastors and our missionaries, right? The work of the Lord. I think, again, it can be twofold, right? Both can be true. But again, boiling it down to the heart, I think success in a business isn't necessarily how big it is, but maybe your impact on the men or women that you work with or work for you, right? I think that's probably true in any line of work that we do, is that the success within our company, whether employees or employer, is really ultimately the ministry that we have to the one another's, even in the church, even in the business, even to the unbeliever that we might work alongside, right? Our lives are a testimony unto the Lord in what we do, right? So with our resources, whether that's time or whether that's funds in the bank or even in the way in which we've been gifted in terms of personality or ability to love on others, like we're called to be faithful ministers. And so I think often we act as if we go to work to punch a clock or to get a salary and increase our income so that we can have more. And I think when we think of the workplace as a ministry, then it really it shifts the priorities. That the reason we go to work is we work unto the Lord is that we might minister to others, certainly that we would provide for our families. Often we get caught up with work being a means to just provide or put food on the table. And I think for the Christian, we don't get to compartmentalize work different from church, different from family. I think that the Lord's work in our lives really is in its entirety or as a whole,
Mhm.
right? So I am not different at work than I am at home, than I am at church, or than I am on the baseball field or whatever hobbies I might have, snowboarding.
Yeah.
I think that often we think about work as just that means to put food on the table. I was thinking as I was saying that earlier that our ministry at home isn't really primarily about putting food on the table. Granted, as men, we work. That's what we do. We enjoy, or we should enjoy, the work that we do, or work in general. I mean, we've been called to work since creation, and so that's always been something we get to do.
Well, and I think you hit. That's probably a whole nother episode. Do you enjoy your job?
Yeah.
And probably a lot of us would say, no. But I think, look, whether you have a quote unquote fun job or not, like you're saying, it's perspective.
Yeah.
And we should enjoy being able to provide for our family, having a job.
Yeah, listen, if we believe God is who he says he is, right? Sovereign, right? Then the job that we have, he has given us.
Yep.
And so I think with the right perspective, we go into that job knowing that it is that we're to steward that. And we're to use that job as a means to honor him. And so I think part of honoring him is not only how we serve, our fellow employee in terms of ministering to them and working well with them and not being grumblers and complainers, while we're there, but being encouragers to them, right? Being the light of Christ there. I mean, those are where we get to really practice loving the unbeliever, practice the great commandment, right? Practice telling others about who Christ is, even in ways that are just mundane and everyday, right? Just kind of like going through the motions. Those are opportunities to show the love of Christ day to day or day in and day out. But the other part, and I think what I was thinking about too, is that, when we think of our work, it is more than putting food on the table. I think where I was going to go is that work is how we care and provide well for our families. It's how we do ministry at home, because our kids see that, or our wives see that, right? Our wives understand that while maybe we don't love our job, I'm not sure that's the best way to think about our job anyways, whether we love it or not.
Right.
It's a means to honor the Lord. It's a means to put food on our tables. It's a means to care well for our family. And so I think the perspective we have as believers is that work is used to glorify the Lord, minister to our family, right? And that's ultimately our testimony for Christ in our workplace. So,
yeah, no, this is really helpful stuff, Neil. Just to think through that work is definitely more than just punching in and punching out, and that's really why it's been really a joy to work with you this past year, kind of seeing how it actually worked. Because if I'm honest, like I really, until I met you, I was very, okay, this is my job, this is my work, I get it done, and then I go home and I'm with my family. But you really helped me understand that we just have this one life.
Yeah.
And it's a continuous thread and not just like so, compartmentalized where, I do this at work, I do this at home, and I do this at church. Yeah. Well, it's all threaded together.
Yeah.
So
yeah, one thing as you're saying that, I'm mindful of, and I think we said early on that I've been able to do electrical work, and then started a couple of businesses doing that. There was, and maybe we'll jump into this at a different point in this, but there was a season in my life that I thought I would go off to seminary and I don't know, maybe be a pastor or on the mission field, and probably primarily pastor. I really fell in love with the local church. Do you think that is really one of the greatest ministries the Lord has given man, is to be involved, the one another's, right? I think you get into Paul's letters, and boy, it's sure clear on how vital the church is in family life, or as a single Christian, like in our lives as believers. The local church is pretty imperative. So in one sense, I was really drawn to shoot off to seminary and maybe start that. I remember I had a good friend of mine, my pastor back in San Diego, that And we sat down, had lunch a couple different times. And I just remember a conversation we had. I was at a job at the time and really actually thinking about either starting a business, electrical contracting, or going off to seminary at the time. And yeah, due to some circumstances going on in my life, it just seemed to make sense that seminary was going to have to get on hold, and I would start a business. And this dear brother was just faithful to remind me that think of business as ministry. And so when I think of success, right, and you think of, certainly in one sense, we get caught up in the monetary side of it, and money's a part of it. There's no doubt, right? But I think ultimately success is the opportunity that you have to do ministry within your workplace. And I was fortunate enough to start a couple different electrical contracting businesses, in particular in San Diego, when I had just an opportunity to really do ministry from behind my desk. And it was really kind of there that I really realized that I had probably more impact or more opportunity to do one-on-one ministry really in the truck with the guys I was working with, or in the office when the guys were coming in, working through some stuff at home, and these guys were unbelievers. Most of them, I think we had a few believers in our business there, but most of these guys had I had great gospel opportunity, specifically because of the way that I approached my work. In terms of, look, I may not have a pulpit, but I have a business. I may not have a pulpit or a mission field, but work is my mission field. And my office was a great place, or on the job was a great place for me to really have influence on the lives of those guys that I worked with and worked for us. And so I reflect back on that season, and it was really a sweet reminder, maybe not a reminder, but an understanding that the Lord gave me that work was my ministry. And so when I think in our conversations over the year or so, as I've thought through ministry or success in work, it was the ministry the Lord allowed me to do in my work in those years in San Diego, and then in these subsequent businesses that I've been able to be a part of. Even as we work together, I've seen opportunity to really share the gospel or come alongside young guys that, this company, we've been fortunate to have young believers with us. And so these are young men that we get to pour into. And the Lord was kind in San Diego to allow me to see a couple of young men come to Christ, and not only from a perspective of seeing eternal things happen, but even the temporal. I mean, a couple, I had an opportunity to help, I think it was 3 or 4 guys start their own electrical contracting businesses, and so I think when we step back and we take a perspective on what success is, like, are we building a business so that we can have more money or bigger houses or stuff? Let's just use stuff, right? Or are we building a business that we might serve others and care well for people and really think through it as gospel or ministry opportunity, And so I think, the Lord was really gracious to the Almeida family, Cassie and I, and even our kids, as they were, it was a lot of work. It was hard. It was a lot of struggle. And as you know, I mean, you've been doing it too. But I think when I understood that it's an eternal perspective and that all of our work is unto the Lord, not just putting food on the table with my family, but bringing my kids and my wife into a business that became a ministry for us, it was really an opportunity to share the love of Christ. And I think that when I think of success, it's not so much how much our business makes, though we need to be making money, right? I mean, our businesses, they're not going to last long if we're not putting money in the bank and paying the bills. And so certainly, I also want to take my family on vacation, right? I also want my family to be in a nice home. And so, like, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying money's the issue. Again, heart, that's the heart, right? But I am saying the Lord will bless those who are faithful to prioritize the ministry that work can be and should be for the Christian.
Yeah, and that blessing isn't always in the form of money. That's right. It's sometimes it's salvation of others that you get to be a part of, and it's pretty incredible.
That's right. Yeah, because really that's a faithfulness not only in ministry at work, but that's part of the faithfulness in your ministry at church, your ministry at your home, right? The rewards are eternal, right? I mean, 4 of my children have been baptized, right? I've been so fortunate to see the Lord do the work in the hearts of my young kids as they're getting older now and marrying off. Life is taking off, isn't it? But the success is looking to the Lord to to really do the work in the hearts of
Yeah.
my kids, right? Or the people we're involved with, or the guys that we get to work with, my wife, the church ministry that we get to be a
Yeah.
part of. And, and I think, and more so probably in this last year, I've seen guys come to our company and work for us and just grow in the Lord and find themselves desiring things of the Lord. And I think a lot of that has to do with the influence that you and I get to have or get to play, the role we get to play in their lives in terms of encouraging them. Yeah, it's hard. Work's hard. There are days we go home exhausted, and even, to the point of, tears in terms of, I'm not sure I'm going to do this. I mean, it's hard for sure. But I think with the proper perspective, it's a joy. We're reminded that our call isn't the temporal work that we're in. We're doing it. That's what we do. Maybe that's part of our call to do the work, but really our call is the eternal work that we're in. And how intentional we are with that is really, it's important to prioritize those things. But
yeah. No, that's super helpful. So you started to go into it a little bit, but family. What does successful families look like? What does it mean to have a successful home life? Again, to kind of set us up here, one perspective might be, all my kids are super well behaved, at 1 year old and on. They're perfect little people. That might be a perspective. And if you have sweet, great, well-behaved kids, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing it right, or vice versa.
Sure.
But
yeah, sure.
But I think we can often go to like, okay, yeah, I want to have a successful family. I want everyone to just step in line and do what I tell them to. So successful family. What?
Yeah, that's good too. It's funny. I have a daughter getting married on Saturday, so I'll probably have to keep some tears under control here. I think I've been pretty emotional this week just thinking about that. Super grateful. But here's kind of how I have thought that through in my marriage. My wife and I, Cass, and I have thought about that a lot. Kids can be hard. Family's hard. It's hard in the sense of, like, as we come off the conversation that we just talked about, work. Like, I like to work. I really do. I mean, I can be busy, and there's always something to do, right? And so, one thing I think Cass and I had to really prioritize as we start our business, as we get into work, is schedule our time home. Schedule my time home. Like I have to make sure that I shut down at, so our schedules, I'm trying to be home by 6:30, right? At the end of the day, like, and I want to be careful. Like, I'm only giving times only because it's just a practice that I've done. Like, time's not the issue, right? I mean, schedules aren't the issue. I think I want to be careful that I don't, there's no expectation on, there's nothing biblical that says I got to be home between 6 and 6, right? That's not how that works. But I think I had to put some things in place so that I guarded my family time because I can just be busy. And so I think when I think of, success at home for Cass and I, as we built our home, it was really prioritizing home for the first few years of my marriage. Maybe if I'm honest, first 10 to 15 years of my marriage and in my little kids' life when they were young, I was probably too busy. I had a lot going on, and maybe that's a different conversation without too much detail. I was just overly busy and maybe misaligned in terms of biblical priorities. And so, the Lord showed me some things in my own life that I had to kind of put back in focus. And one of the things that we learned to do, Cassie and I, was that we were going to step back from the work and prioritize the family and ministry. And what I mean by that is, work is what I get to do. That's part of what I do is work. It's part of who I am, the electrical world, right? But ultimately, that's not who I am. I am in Christ, and my call first is to my wife and to my kids, and so I have to make sure that I'm going to prioritize that time with my family. And so we've learned to kind of make sure we get up and have breakfast together. And so Cassie and I, and so what that looks like is, I have to get up earlier if I want to be in the Word, right? I have to be up earlier, and so Cassie sets her alarm, and we get up earlier, or we get up together, and we'll have breakfast together, right? I try to, for probably 15 years now, we have, at the end of our day, I get home between 5:30 and 6:30, and our family has gathered around the couch with a cup of coffee. And we have prioritized conversation in our living room, all 6 of us, that we might catch up on our day, that we might talk about what we read in the scriptures in the morning, that we might figure out what tomorrow looks like, or plan a vacation, right? But every day for the last 15 years, barring some things that are going on, schedules that are crazy, I'm out of town, who knows, right? Things happen, but we prioritize time together. And so when I think of success in family, it's keeping the main thing, right? The Lord has a call on our lives as men to be busy at work, but that's not our primary call. Our primary call is, if we're elected, we're called to be in Christ, and then we're called to care for our wife, and then we're called to minister to our children. Right? Then we have a commitment to the local church, and then we have our work. And so however we prioritize those, one of our greatest priorities is ministering to our families. And so in order to do that, I got to be home. I got to be present, and so for us, we just had to kind of dial in what that was going to look like. And the Lord is just really gracious to let us keep those patterns in our life. So I think when I think of success, it's not that my kids are saved, right? Because I don't save. That's the Lord's work. But part of what I had to do is prioritize my children, right? When my buddies are going snowboarding for the weekend and I can't go, or there's a fishing trip planned and I got to make sure I'm with my family, or when I can work all night, or take an extra job. I mean, there's jobs I have lost and said no to because I've prioritized being with Cassie and the kids. I would just as soon, and I think we've shared this before too, like, and this is a hard one because, everybody thinks about this differently. But I know that there's been times when I'll take a vacation and I'll shut my phone off. I had a friend one time, concerned that we were in trouble because I wasn't answering my phone for a week, but I'm with my wife and kids, and I want to make sure that I'm going to prioritize that more than my work. Because when the kids or my wife sees that I'm going to prioritize them over that relationship deepens. I find trust in my marriage, right? I find my kids are willing to come to me because they know that I'm willing to sacrifice that for them. And I think that's the important, let me be clear. I think, like, for me, that was the important thing.
Yeah.
For me, it was important for me to make business second, right? And it mattered. I mean, I didn't want to lose. In the 15 years that I've been doing that, I haven't lost a customer. I've had a few people upset. I've had to work through some things, but and when I say that, I mean, like, I would shut down and I would not answer my phone, and customers didn't know where I was. I had to respond to emails or I had, the automatic emails. And so we set some things in place. So, I mean, it's not like I disappeared, but I would not prioritize work. I would not answer my phone on the road if I was with my family. If we had scheduled time together, like, I would not answer my phone. If I would just make it clear to those that work for me that I'm not available, and that didn't always go over well. But here's what it did: it impacted my home.
Yep.
It built a relationship with my daughter, who's in the middle of great distress, or my son, who's working through something at home. I was able to just really shut that thing off, phone and work, and prioritize my family so that they knew that they were more important than the jobs that I had going, than the work that I had. And so I think, look, when I say success, I think my opinion, and my conviction probably is that I would rather lose customers or not get the job than ignore my wife for half an hour, right? There are seasons when I have guys working overnight that I have to answer my phone. So don't hear me say like I don't ever answer my phone at night. There are seasons where, that bid's got to get out and I got to postpone, right? And that's communicated well up front with the family. But ultimately, my priority would be my home over and against a job or a project that I had to get out, or the phone ringing, right? Or the emails that are coming in, because that stuff never ends.
And that's what we say all the time. And I've started kind of
that stuff
repeating what you say.
There's never a good time for a family vacation. There's never a good time for a wedding. Yep. There's never a good time for, I mean, you get into, like, if I plan it, something's coming up. It's just how it works. And so at the end of the day, I have to be able to just shut it down and just go do that thing with my family. Right. So, and And I've always seen that. It's never a good time to take that time off.
Well, and I have two sweet little girls who I just love. And I think a kind of a default way of thinking is, okay, yes, I want them to be saved. Okay. That and I want them to be saved. My prayer is that, they know the Lord, and that the Lord draws them to him. But you know what? That they don't really understand that right now. So I'll wait till they're teenagers to get into that. Then we're going to sit down. We're going to have this huge conversation, and boom, they're going to know who Christ is, and they'll probably get saved.
Yeah.
That I think that's a default, especially maybe even for men. And really, it's what I've learned from wise men around me is no. It starts now. You get on the floor now with them, and you cuddle with them, and all the things.
Yeah.
Now is the time that you put in with investing into them, and it'll pay dividends later.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, if the Lord chooses to save them.
Yeah, as you say that, brother, I just think of some examples in our own family of that. Think that can't be overstated, that if you're waiting till you can, quote unquote, reason, I'm not sure you can reason with teenagers at times anyways, but I'm not sure if you're taking this position where, they're young and I'll invest later, or that's a problem. I think that's short-sightedness. I don't think that is the way we're to father our children, care for them, to raise them. And I think when we're thinking of our children, it starts immediately. It starts immediately. And I think of my own family, when they were younger, and I know I made some and the Lord was kind, right? At the end of the day, here's the thing, and I probably should start with this. We don't save our kids.
Yep.
We really don't. We are instruments the Lord uses that we might be clear with the gospel to our children, not just in how we speak it to them, or how clear and how intelligent we communicate the gospel to our children. Probably more than that, the way that we live. If I'm telling my kids that Jesus loves them and we need to obey, and I don't obey, or I am hypocritical in some ways. Now, granted, there are times when we fall short, maybe more often than we'd like to admit, certainly. But I do think our actions are going to have an infinite more impact on our children than the words that we say. So it's one thing to tell them on Sunday, or even at a Thursday night family, discipleship or family devotionals, right? Like it's one thing to share that on Thursday night with the kids, and then you're off all week and not paying attention, or you're too busy at work that you can't get to their sports, or their sports is another thing, but that's a whole other thing. You can't get to be home with them, and you don't have the time to listen to them. You don't have the time to hold them, to put them to bed, to love on them as we're called to love on them. And so I think all of that early on builds trust. All that early on builds a dependency that your kids know when life's hard, they can come to dad.
Yeah.
When things hit the fan, they can come see dad. Again, I was saying earlier about just some examples I can think of in my own family where, my 22-year-old daughter or 21-year-old daughter is struggling with stuff. And she's coming to dad at 21. Not a group of friends. Maybe not, one sense, not her pastor. Not that she doesn't go to her pastor. She does, but she's seeking dad's counsel first. I am her first shepherd. I am her pastor. And so if I think that way and I raise him that way, then my ministry at home, one, it doesn't end. Two, it's trusted because I'm pouring into her. And she knows that I care more about her than I care about the job I'm working on or the work that I have. Not that those things aren't important. And that's the thing. Don't hear me minimize our job or our work or the deadlines. And that's life, that we do that. But often we get caught up with that stuff to the degree that we're putting our kids on the burner, or how do you say, the side burner, the
back burner,
the back burner. That what is it, simmer dial that you just wait there and I'll get to you when I can. No, I think I think what is probably most effective is when I bring them front and center, work hard on that, love them through whatever they're working through, and then I'm going to get to the job. I mean, I remember when our guys were little, Cassie would call and I would have to, hit timeout, put the bid on hold, go home and work through some stuff for some of our kids, right? I mean, thankfully I was only, 15 minutes from the house. My office was at the time. And, so it was an easy trip home to kind of work through some stuff, sometimes it called for that, and so, and I realize it's not that everybody can do that. So I want to be careful, right? But I do want to emphasize the importance of dad being primary in ministry at home, not just with your wife, that's your first call, but your children. They know whether they're 5 or 6 or 15 or 20, right? They know that we are prioritizing them over the distractions of family. And distractions can be work. Distractions can be, hobbies. Distractions can be those things that would just probably anything that would take us away from prioritizing the ministry in our home,
Yeah.
So, yeah. So when I think of, that's good. So I guess probably there's a lot of words there. When I think of success in our home, I don't think success is salvation for our children. I just don't, that's not for us. We don't save our children. But I think success in our home is a genuine love for one another, a sweet relationship with a 27-year-old daughter who's about to get married. I hope I said that right. She's not 26 or a 25-year-old son who lives, 9 hours away, and we get to talk 3-4 times a week, and work through even hard stuff at his church that he's thinking about and helping him think and process through some of that stuff, right? Like those things that we get to do now as a dad of older kids in terms of their ministry in their homes, right? And their walk with the Lord. I do believe that didn't get built when they were 15, but when they were 5.
Yeah.
Right. That didn't start that kind of trust or that level of shepherding, even still when they were 20 or 15, but when they were 3 and 5. And I share all that to say, like, I had to learn that.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a guy ask me, and I think I told you the story without getting into that whole testimony. He asked me, if I ask you, Neil, who your wife seeks spiritual counsel from, she's got questions from Scripture. Where does she go? It's funny that question, maybe that was, I don't know, 18 years ago. That question really struck me hard. It wasn't me at that point in my life. I wasn't that guy that was shepherding that way. 20 years ago, 18 years ago, it was a whole different Neil. And again, that's the sanctifying work, right, that the Lord does. And so I'm grateful for that. But I think along the way, the Lord has shown me a lot of things that were important to prioritize. And while work is a priority and important, it's not the priority, right? Our relationship with Christ, then our relationship with our wives, and then our children, right? Like that's the priority. We work and we desire success in work so that our success in our home is honoring to the Lord. It's going to glorify God. Those are our ministries that Lord uses, that the Lord will use, right? Eternally, right? With a proper perspective. And so, boy, there's a lot more that can be said. I can keep rambling.
Yeah. So, no, this is all such good, just practical life advice.
Yeah.
So, and Mel and I talk about your kids and just we're grateful and blessed by just seeing them interact with you. And we desire the same thing, to have adult children still wanting to have a cup of coffee with us, after work and download and stuff. So so thank you for that testimony and just your faithfulness. It's that everyday faithfulness, So
yeah, that's good.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I heard that on one of your other podcasts, and I won't remember the guy's name, but it's that faithfulness. It's a steady faithfulness, trusting the Lord. Do we believe His word? Do we believe His promises? Because there are days it's hard. Work is hard. I mean, life's just full of life is full of trouble. Sparks fly upwards.
Yeah.
Job. Right. So I think, I just think there's difficulty, and I think that's part of the journey we're on. Is we just, it's perspective. There's a lot of hard that comes our way, but all of that is used for the glory of God, and all of that is used for our sanctifying work, right? Not just for me as a dad or husband, but as a brother in the Lord to
Yeah.
my oldest son, who is a brother to me in the Lord, right?
Mhm.
So it's all ministry, right? It's all perspective, and it's all unto the
Yeah.
Lord. And so I think,
Yeah.
it's good.
Helpful stuff. So before we jump into the last discussion here about church and what does that look like, what does success and that look like, 30 seconds or maybe a minute on sports. I kind of came up there. We might ruffle some feathers, but what's some quick wisdom on having the right perspective on sports? Because I know you and I have, kind of been involved at, separate times or whatever with different people on, sports kind of taking things over, just kind of ruling the house. Like dad's not ruling the house, mom's not ruling the house. I guess you could say the kids are ruling the house. Sports are ruling the house.
Yeah.
Anyways, maybe some of our audience is going to turn the podcast off at this point. But no, what's some encouragement just to think through?
Yeah, there's a lot of things kind of pop into my mind when I think about this, because I know some of what we're sharing, and really probably a lot of what we're sharing, can be really kind of considered preferential.
Sure.
Yep. And so I want to be careful that it's just not, that I'm not so dogmatic about these things. A lot of this for me was just very convictional. I saw some patterns in my life early on that I was all about. And there were things that I had to make adjustments. And it might be fair to say maybe you swung too far the other way, right? So I get it. But, I think with that said, sports are a huge distraction. I do think that in our culture, sports has quickly become an idol. It's become something that has really grabbed the whole of our time and has really taken us away from our home. And I think it's been really detrimental. I like sports. I'm not a guy that loves them. I played a lot of sports growing up. I will say that, I had a guy challenge me in my love for snowboarding. I actually got told once that I needed to divorce snowboarding and marry my wife. And I was already married a few years, right? So I got called out for how much snowboarding I was doing, right? I was a hobby guy. I really loved to ride snowboards. And so for me, I literally had to divorce snowboards. Now, and what that meant for me is I quit riding snowboards. It was probably, I took a 10-year hiatus or thereabouts, 9 years before I rode my snowboard again. And that was to prioritize my home, right? Maybe part of that, those dang lift tickets started going up, so the cost got super expensive. But I think in reality, it was helpful for me to kind of recalibrate, right? I had to kind of get off that thing and hang that up in the closet. And a few years later, Cassie bought me a snowboard and some gear, and I went out and was able to do it again.
Yeah. Not
that she made me stop. It was just a good, again, similar to that, the first guy that asked me about spiritual leadership in my home, right? Another guy asked me about snowboarding. And it was one of those things that I had to kind of like put in check. And so I use that as an example, right? Again, personal conviction. I had to work that out. That doesn't mean everybody's got to stop snowboarding. That's not snowboarding. Again, snowboarding or sports, that's not the issue. Yep. It's really not the issue. It's the heart. What are we prioritizing? That becomes the issue. And so, I'll give you an example in our home. We were heavy into soccer. We had one of our daughters that we got told a couple times that she had great potential. And that's what all these coaches say. If there's, a half good person, not that this daughter was good. She was quick. She was aggressive. She was a fireball out there, but she was also 5'6", and we're getting, pressed on by the all-star coach to get her in the travel league and get her going on this soccer adventure. And so, we thought we wouldn't get into it like that, but let's try it. And next thing you know, it's travel ball. And so I'm gone on Sundays. And so we're not prioritizing church. We're prioritizing soccer. And if I'm honest, I think first that's a problem. When you prioritize anything over the gathering of the saints, I do think that becomes an issue. Let me be clear. I think when, if you're playing sports every now and then, and it's kind of, you got a tournament, and it happens to be on a Sunday, fine. That's great. Like, I'm not saying here nor there. I think what I saw in my home is we started getting pulled away from the weekly regular gathering of the saints. And as I caught that, it really, as the Lord showed that to us, we really ended up pulling out of that stuff. We we stopped sports altogether. We actually took 2, maybe 3 years and did no sports.
Yep.
That was a season where I had one of our daughters playing soccer, one was playing flag football, one was doing dance. And I think the other one was still in diapers or with mom, and so too young to play sports. And so we're running kids all over. We're asking, the soccer parent to bring, one of our daughters over to the dance place so that Cassie can bring the kids home, and like we were all over the place. And so we just, first of all, we were exhausted. So parents that are going out, running like crazy and doing all that anyways, quite frankly, I just don't know why I want to do that. But I think real quick, you lose or misprioritize the first thing, right? Which is the gathering of the saints. And I think when you don't prioritize that gathering of the saints, then other things are important. And when our kids think that other things are important, guess what? Other things become important.
Yeah.
And you want that influence of your children unto the Lord, right? So I want my influence for my kids to be about Christ, about the local church, about ministry and one another's. When I start skipping church or start prioritizing sports, since we're talking about sports, it could be anything, then I'm making other things as a dad. Yeah. Because I set the tone. I'm the one that makes that thing more important or not more important. And so I think sports has had a detrimental effect on the church. Yeah. That's what I think. Yeah. And I think my advice or counsel that I would give to parents that are thinking through sports is certainly do sports, but manage them. Yep. Or they will manage you. Yeah. And I think you need to set the right priorities in your home. And I know that your kids will know what you prioritize by how you let sports govern your household. Yeah. 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 I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people over the years that have been bummed. Right. And while I would be careful not to blame sports as the problem, because the truth is, here's the thing. Sports aren't the problem. You are. Right. You are. Yep. I want my kid to be a pro. I want my kid to have fun. I want my kids to meet all these people. I want my kids to have social interaction. There's a myriad of reasons why you have kids do sports. But if you're not careful, then quickly sports will take over you and your family, And I think dad and or mom, but dad primarily has to really make it clear what the priorities are in the home. And guard against that stuff that will take over or prioritize for you. And sports can be that. Yeah. A couple of things I hear you say as you say this is, one, we're not just picking on sports here. Yeah, that's right. There's many things that could be a distraction, as you called it, a distraction. And secondly too, I hear you really just wanting to provide some thoughts and wisdom. You or I don't have the keys to the only way to live. Oh man, that's right. And I hear that come across, and I'm just reiterating that to our audience here. Like, we're not saying we've found the keys to life, but here's definitely some things to think about. That's right. As you're going through this journey called life. Yeah, because some people they love that time with the family. They can do that sport thing as a family thing, and that works. I mean, you can do that, but quickly, all of a sudden, you're doing multiple travel leagues. You got multiple kids in sport. Like I just think in one sense, how can you, the title of the podcast is success. You asked me about success in your family. Well, is success in your family professional athletes? Yeah. Is that success? Right. What is success? And I think when you ask me that question, what is success? It's eternal. How are my kids grasping the truths of Scripture? How are my kids understanding the importance of the gospel ministry in their own lives? Do they desire the local church? Do they desire to see others come to the Lord? Do they desire to see Christ lifted and glorified because we've prioritized that? Or is that just part of what we add on as we're like in the minivan heading over to the soccer field? Right? Yeah. I just think we as dads set that priority in our home. And I think if we're not careful to evaluate that, give careful consideration to that, then it will take over our family. I've seen it. It started that in our own home, and then I can't tell you how many people I've seen. That's not a big deal. It's just for a season. 3 months a year, they're not at church on Sunday, and fine. That's fine if that's not, your family wants to do that. In one sense, like that's fine. But I would just question, like, what do your kids love? They love soccer. They love Jesus. Certainly, they can love both, right? But what do they prioritize? People of the Lord, or the Lord Himself, or that thing? You know.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of the conviction cast, and I really dealt with early on. And so we've had to prioritize those things. And so we did sports, like all the, we had a couple kids doing soccer at one time, and the rest of the family would be out watching soccer. And then we had a couple kids doing flag football at one time, and then we'd be like, so I'm not saying we didn't do any sports. We did, but we really, so we looking at the leagues and figured out, let's do flag football this year. Let's do baseball next year. Let's do surfing, next year. Like, we just had to be intentional in how we manage the sports, because they will manage you. That's just what I've seen. Again,
good stuff.
Convictional. Yeah. I want to be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So let's talk about church. What does it look like to be successful, quote unquote, at your church? Some might say, or maybe some hearts, we might not say this out loud, but in our hearts, we would go, okay, to be successful at my church means I got to have a title. I've got to keep rising up the ranks to be an elder. If you're a young man or a man in general, or at some churches, I got to be a deaconess. If you're a woman. So, yes, speak on that.
Yeah, I think, we probably have touched on it a little bit along the way here.
Sure.
In terms of our work and even as we talked about sports a little bit, I do think prioritizing the gathering of the saints, right? Hebrews talks about not forsaking the gathering. And I do think, Paul addresses the churches, right? I think those letters that we get from Paul are very much addressing a corporate body of believers that gather for one purpose. And that is to worship Jesus, to know Him, to do the one another in, right? That's where we do ministry. That's where we care for others. And so I think when I think of, I'm not sure if I've ever honestly thought through like what does success look like at church. I think that we get caught up with how many people we know, and maybe, sometimes, church becomes popularity contest. Sometimes church becomes about friends and meeting people or making sure that we're connecting well or building community. And certainly those are all part of gathering.
Meeting your spouse.
Yeah. Boy, that's a good one too. I think, we go to church so we can meet our significant other or make friends, and while that is a blessing, that's a grace the Lord gives us. We get those things. That's not why we go to church. All right. We go to worship. And so I think in that worship, part of the blessing the Lord gives us. And again, in terms of defining it as success, it's as the Lord allows to give to us maybe ministry in terms of discipleship, in terms of plugging into a local Bible study or Bible study from the church, even as you can serve as a deacon, right? As others see your gifting and you're able to use your gifts at the local body, like those are maybe, for lack of a better way to put this, success, right? Being used by the Lord in your local body. But then what does that look like? So I think ministering, one thing Cassie has always said to me is sometimes the work in the local body is to love others, right? There's so many different personalities and so many different things that can come up that maybe can be stretching or difficult, or, learning to love people all differently. The beauty about the church is more often than not, it's just so made up of a wide variety of people, all kinds of different personalities, all kinds of different attitudes and approaches to life and opinions, right? And sometimes those can be hard because we think, boy, I've done it this way. And even as we talk about this podcast, right? I mean, this is how the Lord has used me in my home and in my work and even in my church. And so in one sense, boy, it's been really a great blessing and I've been really thankful. But it's not as though I got, any sort of lock on it. Right? And the Lord, the beauty about the church is the myriad of personalities. We're not all hands or feet, right? We're not all, tongues or eyes. The Lord has gifted us all so uniquely. But here's the thing. I do think that part of that success that we have is using those gifts in the church so that the Lord will be glorified. And if He should choose to, give us maybe a shepherding opportunity, or maybe a discipleship opportunity, or even just plug us into local Bible studies. Like, I think that's where success in the local church comes from, is, and I may not even define it as success as much as saying that's the blessing that we get is being used in a local church, because I think that's where we share our testimony. I had a friend that years ago would tell me, tell your story. That's where we get to tell our story. That's where the impact on the one another takes place. That's where the loving each other and learning how to love each other, and really the edification, and quite frankly, even the admonishment, right? I mean,
right.
We get to call each other out there, right? When as brothers and sisters in the Lord, when we have opportunity to love on others, and part of that love is to say it how it is, to be upfront with each other, and to be able to work through the hard together. And so I think here's success: working through the hard together unto the glory of the Lord, right? It's not that we have or are able to do it well apart from the empowering of the Holy Spirit, apart from the understanding that Christ alone and his righteousness alone covers our wickedness and allows us to love each other the way that we get to love each other. Because of Christ, we get to do that. And so, yeah, I just think the perspective, again, is an eternal one. It is a one of one another's and loving and serving others in the local body. Yeah, I think if anyone is going to church to think they want to be an elder, boy, that's the wrong reason to go to church. And I don't know, yeah, maybe some people do that, right? I don't know how many people are really doing that. But even sometimes we go to church so that we can have intellectual knowledge. Sometimes we go to church so that we can just learn for the sake of learning. And that's great. Intellectual knowledge is important. Right doctrine is necessary to right living. And so that's just very important. But if we're going to church for those reasons, yeah, I think we're missing sight of our call, right? We go to church to worship. We go to church to edify and build up one another. We go to church to love the Lord Jesus Christ for what he's done for us. We're not worthy of that, but Christ did that for us. And so we gather to worship. And I think if we have other motives that are maybe prioritized over genuine worship and the one another gifts, I'm not sure if that's how you say that, but I think then we get caught up with self, and self gets in the way. And so we want to be careful that we are really at church to love and serve Christ, for sure. So yeah, that's what more interesting to think about success in the church. I don't know. Again, like I think we said it already.
I don't even know if that's the right word, but the point, I think, is just by way of communicating. Because
it's holistic too, right? Meaning all of life. We don't compartmentalize. We said this early on, right? Church is not separate from our work or from our family, right? We're all part of the body of Christ, and we just gather together on Sunday. That just is very important. That gathering together on Sunday really revitalizes and re-energizes us so that we might worship well on Monday and worship well on Tuesday, right? That worship is how we love our families.
Yeah.
That worship is how we do our ministry at work, right? That worship is holistic. Our lives should be worship. It is Romans 12, right? 1 and 2. When we think of our spiritual service of worship, like that worship is what we do in every area of life, because who we are, because what Christ has done. And so it's just all of life should be encompassed by really an attitude of worship, of thankfulness unto our Savior Christ because of his righteousness that has covered us. And so just got my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could keep talking. I love talking with you about this stuff, and I know it'll be a blessing to share with our audience. So, Neil, thank you so much for your time and just your encouragement. I know it's been a blessing just to work alongside you this past year, and really. I really appreciate our friendship. So thanks, brother.
Likewise, brother. Been really thankful for you too. So happy to do it.
Awesome.
Blessings.